Chapter 1: The Glittering Night. The chandeliers sparkled above the grand ballroom, throwing golden light across polished floors. Music from a string quartet floated through the air, mixing with the hum of voices and the clink of glasses. Guests in gowns and tuxedos moved like a sea of color, laughing, whispering, and waiting for the evening to begin. Clara Bennett stood near the edge of the room, notebook tucked safely in her handbag. As a young reporter for the London Daily Gazette, she had been lucky to get an invitation. Lord Pembroke's charity gala was the most talked-about event of the year, and every important name in the city was here. She watched the host himself make his rounds. Lord Pembroke was tall and proud, his silver hair combed neatly, his smile wide. He shook hands, whispered into ears, and accepted flattery as if he were collecting treasures. Clara knew that behind the wealth and charm, there were rumors, whispers of secrets, debts, and enemies. The orchestra swelled, and the crowd shifted toward the stage at the far end of the room. Soon, Lord Pembroke would make his speech, and the true purpose of the gala would begin. Clara lifted her glass of lemonade, scanning the glittering faces around her. She wasn't here just for society gossip. She was here for a story, and she had a feeling that tonight, secrets would not stay hidden for long. As she glanced across the room, she caught something odd. A man in the far corner stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on Lord Pembroke. He didn't clap, didn't smile, didn't move. For only a moment, their eyes met. Then he turned sharply and disappeared into the crowd. Clara shivered. The night was glittering, yes, but beneath the sparkle, something dangerous was waiting. Chapter 2: The Toast. The orchestra quieted, and a hush fell over the grand ballroom. Lord Pembroke stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room, a crystal glass of champagne in his hand. His voice, deep and confident, carried across the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we gather not only in celebration, but in generosity. This gala is proof that when people of wealth and influence come together, we can do great things." Polite applause rippled through the audience. Clara scribbled a note in her mind, watching the way he smiled at the guests as if each word were a performance. She had seen him speak before in Parliament. He always looked in control, always certain of his place at the top. Lord Pembroke lifted his glass higher. "To the future, may it be as bright as this evening." All around the room, glasses rose. The sound of crystal chiming against crystal filled the air. Clara sipped her lemonade, her eyes scanning faces, jotting mental notes. Some guests cheered too loudly. Others exchanged quick, unreadable looks. Lord Pembroke tilted his head back, taking a long swallow. A smile crossed his face. Then, slowly, the smile faltered. He coughed once. Twice. The sound was sharp, cutting through the music. A murmur of confusion spread through the room. "Lord Pembroke!" someone called. The host staggered, his hand clutching his throat. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the stage. Gasps erupted. His face had gone pale, then a shocking shade of gray. In the next instant, he collapsed, striking the floor with a heavy thud. Women screamed. Men rushed forward. The orchestra fell silent, bows frozen in midair. Clara's heart pounded as she pushed through the crowd. She had been right, tonight held more than glitter. Something deadly had just entered the ballroom. Chapter 3: Locking the Doors. The ballroom exploded into noise. "Fetch a doctor!" someone shouted. "No, call for an ambulance!" another voice cried. Women clutched their pearls, some weeping into silk gloves. Men pushed forward, their polished shoes slipping on the marble floor as they tried to see what had happened. The orchestra's instruments screeched in scattered notes before the musicians abandoned their seats. Lord Pembroke lay motionless on the stage, his once commanding presence reduced to a fragile body. A servant dropped a silver tray in fright, the crash echoing like a gunshot. Guests stumbled over one another, some rushing for the doors, others frozen in place. Clara felt herself caught in the swirl of panic. Her reporter's mind raced. Was this a heart attack? Or something far worse? She bent lower, straining to see his lips, his hands, anything that might give her a clue. The grand doors at the back of the hall suddenly slammed shut with a heavy thud. A stern voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. "Everyone remain where you are." Inspector James Whitfield stepped forward, his uniform sharp, his eyes cold with authority. He had been near the stage when Lord Pembroke fell, and now he stood tall before the crowd. "No one leaves this room," he commanded. "Lord Pembroke did not collapse by chance. He has been poisoned." Gasps swept through the ballroom. Clara's pen hand itched. The night had turned from glittering to deadly in the span of a heartbeat. Whitfield strode to the stage, his boots clicking against the polished floor. He knelt beside the broken glass, careful not to disturb the shards. With a gloved hand, he lifted the bottle of champagne that had been resting on a silver tray nearby. "Which bottle did Lord Pembroke drink from?" he asked, his voice firm. A nervous waiter in a white jacket stepped forward, his hands trembling. That one, sir. From the special case delivered this morning. Lord Pembroke said only the finest would do." Whitfield's eyes narrowed. "And was this case kept locked?" The waiter hesitated. "In the wine cellar, sir. But many staff have keys." A murmur rippled through the guests. Clara, listening intently, caught the flicker of guilt on a few faces, too quick, too fleeting to name. She scribbled a mental note: champagne, special case, too many keys. Whitfield poured a small amount from the bottle into a clean glass. He sniffed it, his expression unreadable. Then he dipped the tip of his finger in, touched it to his tongue, and quickly spat it out into a napkin. "Bitter," he said flatly. "Deadly." Gasps filled the room again. The crowd pressed closer, desperate for answers. Clara leaned forward, her heartbeat quickening. She wasn't just watching a tragedy, she was witnessing the beginning of a hunt. Whitfield set the bottle down with care and looked over the sea of pale faces. His voice rang out like a hammer on steel. "The poisoner is in this room." Chapter 4: Suspicions Arise. For a long moment, silence hung in the air after Whitfield's words. Then, like water boiling over, the room erupted. "It must have been the waiter," cried a man in a top hat, pointing at the trembling servant. "Nonsense. A servant wouldn't dare poison his master," another guest snapped. "You think one of us would stoop so low?" A lady in emerald green gasped, her hand pressed to her pearls. Accusations and denials filled the ballroom, voices overlapping in panic and anger. Several guests hurried toward the locked doors, only to find two constables barring the way. Trapped, they returned to their seats, muttering furiously. Inspector Whitfield raised his hand. "Enough." His deep voice cut through the noise. "There will be no wild accusations. We will do this properly. Everyone here is a suspect until proven otherwise." Gasps echoed again, but this time the fear was quieter, colder. Each guest began eyeing the others, suspicion flickering in their glances. Clara stood near the back, watching carefully. She noticed the waiter who had poured the champagne. His face was pale, yes, but his eyes darted not at the inspector, but at another servant by the curtains. A young maid, clutching her apron, who refused to meet anyone's gaze. Clara filed that away. She also noticed Lady Ashcroft, one of the wealthiest women in the city, who sat calmly sipping water as though nothing had happened. No fear, no surprise, not even disgust. Clara's skin prickled. Who stayed calm at a time like this? Whitfield turned toward the crowd. We begin with the champagne. Each servant who had access to the cellar will be questioned. And each guest who toasted tonight will remain until I say otherwise. The truth will come out. Clara's heart pounded. The inspector might control the room, but she knew the real work of finding a killer wasn't in barking orders, it was in noticing the details. And she was noticing plenty. Chapter 5: Clara's Investigation. Clara waited until the inspector's booming voice drew everyone's attention to the front of the ballroom. Then, like a shadow, she slipped toward the side of the room where the servant stood nervously against the wall. She spotted the young maid she had noticed earlier, the one who had avoided everyone's eyes. Clara approached quietly, softening her voice. "You saw what happened, didn't you?" she asked. The maid's hands twisted the fabric of her apron. I don't know anything, miss." "Truly?" Clara studied her face. "That may be true. But I did notice you looked frightened. Not just of what happened to Lord Pembroke. Of something else." The girl's lower lip trembled. She glanced toward the other servants, then leaned closer. I saw someone near the cellar this afternoon. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there." Clara's breath caught. "Who?" The maid shook her head quickly. I can't say. If I do, I'll lose my position. My family depends on me." Before Clara could press further, the inspector's voice rang out. "You there, journalist. No private talks. All questions go through me." Clara stepped back, her cheeks warming under dozens of curious eyes. She gave a polite nod, but inside, her mind was racing. Someone had been near the cellar. Someone who didn't belong. And the maid was too terrified to say their name. Clara tucked that fact away like a hidden blade. The inspector might lead the official search, but she was determined to follow her own trail of clues. Chapter 6: A Web of Motives. The ballroom had grown quieter, the initial panic settling into uneasy whispers. Clara moved among the guests, notebook in hand, pretending to study the decorations while she observed faces and gestures. She began with Lady Ashcroft, the woman who had sipped her water calmly during the chaos. Clara approached her with a polite nod. "Lady Ashcroft, did you know Lord Pembroke well?" Clara asked. The woman's eyes flickered, a shadow passing over her carefully painted features. "Know him?" "Yes. Too well, perhaps. He had a habit of meddling in affairs that were none of his business. He once tried to block one of my charities because of disagreements in the council." Clara scribbled furiously. Politics and influence, motive enough for someone who valued reputation and control. Next, she turned to Mr. Langley, a businessman who had been standing near the stage. He smiled tightly. "Lord Pembroke owed me a great deal of money. I feared I would never see it returned." Clara nodded, noting the way his hand twitched when he spoke. Financial desperation, hidden behind a smile, classic. And then there was young Miss Eliza Trent, who had been unusually quiet. Clara crouched slightly, speaking softly so only she could hear. "You didn't seem very upset when Lord Pembroke fell," Clara said. Eliza's cheeks burned. I disliked him, yes," she admitted. "He spread lies about my family. If the truth came out, it would ruin us. I wanted him gone. But I swear, I did not harm him." Clara's pen paused. Hatred, resentment, family honor, another motive. As she moved through the room, the web of reasons grew. Jealousy, greed, fear, revenge. Each guest had a secret they wanted to protect. And Clara realized, the murderer was hiding among them, carefully blending in. She glanced toward the stage where Whitfield continued questioning the staff. Official investigations could only go so far. To uncover the truth, Clara would need to follow the motives, piece by piece, and catch the smallest sign of guilt. Chapter 7: False Trails. The night had deepened, and the ballroom felt smaller, more crowded. Shadows stretched along the walls, and the candles flickered as the guests whispered among themselves. Clara moved quietly, observing reactions and searching for anything that didn't fit. The first false trail came from Mr. Langley. While Clara had noted his financial motive, she saw him slip toward the buffet with a nervous glance, as if hiding something. When she approached later, he was simply adjusting a napkin. A false lead, but it had distracted her for precious moments. Next was Lady Ashcroft. She laughed lightly at a joke someone told, but her eyes darted constantly toward the champagne table. Clara wondered if she had tampered with the drink. She followed her glance and discovered it was only to watch the staff, ensuring nothing else went wrong. Another red herring. Even Miss Eliza Trent seemed suspicious at times. She fidgeted, whispered to herself, and kept glancing at the inspector. Yet Clara noticed that Eliza's nervousness came from fear of being blamed, not from guilt. Whitfield joined Clara briefly, nodding at her observations. "Be careful," he said. "The killer wants us looking in the wrong place." Every false trail is designed to waste time and attention. Clara's eyes drifted to the shadowy corners. She noticed a small scrap of paper partially hidden beneath a chair, a note that seemed unimportant, yet her instincts screamed otherwise. Every tiny detail could lead to the truth, but only if she ignored the distractions. The guests, unaware of her scrutiny, continued to move like actors on a stage, each with their secret. Clara realized that uncovering the murderer would require patience, attention, and the ability to see through every carefully laid false trail. And somewhere among them, the person who had poisoned Lord Pembroke was watching, confident that their plan had so far succeeded. Chapter 8: Midnight Confessions. The clock in the grand hall struck 12. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and the last notes of the orchestra had faded. Inside, the guests sat in uneasy silence, the candlelight throwing long, trembling shadows on the walls. Clara moved among them, notebook ready. Tonight, she had learned, fear could be as revealing as words. First, Mr. Langley spoke, his voice trembling. I did argue with Lord Pembroke over money," he admitted. "He threatened to ruin my business if I couldn't repay him by next month. But I swear, I didn't touch his glass." A murmur spread through the room. Lady Ashcroft cleared her throat. "I did not like him either. He interfered in every council decision I made. I may have wished him gone in my mind, but I would never act on it." Even Eliza Trent, who had been pale and quiet all evening, finally confessed. I was angry at him," she whispered. "He told lies about my family. I feared what he could do. But I had no reason to harm him physically." Clara noticed that each confession, while unsettling, also clarified motives. Some were innocent, some were anger alone, and some were carefully calculated lies meant to mislead. Whitfield watched quietly, nodding at her observations. "People reveal more than they realize," he murmured. "Fear and guilt show themselves in tiny ways." Then a surprising confession came from a guest who had remained calm all night. Lady Ashcroft lowered her eyes. "There was something I did tonight. I touched the champagne bottles before the toast. I only meant to make sure the glasses were polished. I did not poison him." Clara's pen paused. Could that be true? Or was it a clever attempt to misdirect again? By midnight, the web of motives had become clearer, but so had the tangled threads of deception. Somewhere among the guests, the true killer watched, waiting for the next slip, the next careless word that would reveal them. Clara knew one thing: the murderer had made a mistake already. And soon, that mistake would be their undoing. Chapter 9: The Poisoner's Mistake. The ballroom was quieter now, but the tension was thick enough to touch. Clara and Inspector Whitfield had spent hours piecing together clues, tracing motives, and noting every glance, every twitch, every small sign of guilt. Whitfield stood at the front, motioning for all the guests to gather near the stage. "Tonight," he announced, "we will repeat the toast." A nervous murmur spread through the crowd. Clara kept her notebook close, her eyes scanning each face. She already knew the killer would slip, even slightly, if provoked correctly. The champagne glasses were filled again, this time under the watchful eyes of Whitfield and Clara. Each guest lifted their glass carefully, though a few hands shook noticeably. "Lord Pembroke is no longer with us," Whitfield said, his voice calm, "but justice will be. Someone in this room tried to take his life." Clara noticed it first, a subtle flicker of panic on a guest's face. A hand hovering too long over the glass, a sharp intake of breath. "That hesitation," she whispered to Whitfield. "The hand. Watch." Whitfield nodded, keeping his calm demeanor. "Drink," he said to the remaining guests. The glasses touched lips, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the guilty guest made a move, reaching to add just a cuff, their eyes darting nervously toward the inspector. That tiny slip, that small involuntary gesture, revealed them. Whitfield stepped forward. "You tried to poison Lord Pembroke." Gasps echoed. The guest's shoulders slumped, eyes widening. I didn't mean." They stammered. Clara's notebook filled with the final pieces of the puzzle, motive, opportunity, and now, the fatal mistake. The killer's confidence had faltered, and in that moment, the truth had been exposed. The room held its breath. Justice, long delayed, was about to be served. Chapter 9: The Poisoner's Mistake. The ballroom was quieter now, but the tension was thick enough to touch. Clara and Inspector Whitfield had spent hours piecing together clues, tracing motives, and noting every glance, every twitch, every small sign of guilt. Whitfield stood at the front, motioning for all the guests to gather near the stage. "Tonight," he announced, "we will repeat the toast." A nervous murmur spread through the crowd. Clara kept her notebook close, her eyes scanning each face. She already knew the killer would slip, even slightly, if provoked correctly. The champagne glasses were filled again, this time under the watchful eyes of Whitfield and Clara. Each guest lifted their glass carefully, though a few hands shook noticeably. "Lord Pembroke is no longer with us," Whitfield said, his voice calm, "but justice will be. Someone in this room tried to take his life." Clara noticed it first, a subtle flicker of panic on a guest's face. A hand hovering too long over the glass, a sharp intake of breath. "That hesitation," she whispered to Whitfield. "The hand. Watch." Whitfield nodded, keeping his calm demeanor. "Drink," he said to the remaining guests. The glasses touched lips, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the guilty guest made a move, reaching to add just a cuff, their eyes darting nervously toward the inspector. That tiny slip, that small involuntary gesture, revealed them. Whitfield stepped forward. "You tried to poison Lord Pembroke." Gasps echoed. The guest's shoulders slumped, eyes widening. I didn't mean." They stammered. Clara's notebook filled with the final pieces of the puzzle, motive, opportunity, and now, the fatal mistake. The killer's confidence had faltered, and in that moment, the truth had been exposed. The room held its breath. Justice, long delayed, was about to be served.